Patriot 1 is coming late September, right? You know, we were obsessive over this boot. The last thing that Bruno had to test after it had been jumped, swam with fins over it. It was tested in pretty much every environment, but the last thing we needed to validate was a fast rope strip on the interior of the boot. So what did Bruno do? You rent a Black Hawk in Tennessee because we have to validate it for real. We were going to do some fast rope towers, like that probably would have been fine, but we wanted to do it for real, right? So we geared up, we rented a Black Hawk for 4 hours. If it can withstand a 75-foot fast rope with full kit, we're good to go.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Tone?
Morning, Bear.
We done with Snowmageddon?
That's by far the most snow we've ever gotten in Virginia Beach. So
obviously, by the time this airs, we'll be well past it. But we got like a foot of snow in Virginia Beach, so we had to dig our way out. There was like a 5-foot snowdrift on my road that I had to dig out yesterday. It was like an hour and a half workout. I was drenched.
It's a good workout.
But no plow has come. So good thing I did it or I wouldn't be here today. Well, today we're really excited. We got Bruno Fallon. He's our vice president of outdoor and tactical. And, you know, quick bio on him. I think, Bruno, we've had you on before, but definitely want to reintroduce you. But super unique background, 41 years in the special operations community, came in as a Ranger and then became a Green Beret. Then went over to the 160th, which for those that don't know is an elite unit. You're flying 47s?
Yeah, flight lead in MH-47s.
And then spent his last 11 years at another tier 1 unit in multiple leadership positions. So what we want to do today is, one, we want to tease the Hotwash podcast. That is a new podcast from Born Primitive Tactical, and Bruno will be the host. That airs March 3rd, I believe, is our first episode. So by the time this goes out, you can go check those out. And Bruno will be bringing on a variety of guests from different backgrounds in that world, and pulling out a lot of lessons learned, from the military law enforcement side, but also applicable to life. So we'll hit that at the end. But Bruno, appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, always excited to do it. I'm new into the podcast world, but glad you guys have me on again. It's kind of exciting to be able to sit on this end of it. And now I think this is mentorship. I think that, almost 60 years old, what I've been doing, I can turn around and give back. And that's the whole purpose of the Hotwash. And we'll talk about it, but it's to take lessons learned from the community, and not just the community, coaches, athletes, industry, and put them back out there so people can, grasp it and learn from it. Because if you're not mentoring at this point in your life, you're failing.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we want to dive into on this episode, particularly the leadership lessons, because as you know, when you're, I was in there barely almost 8 years, but you basically 41 years of your life, you are around, an elite caliber of individual, a high standard. And the advantage of that is you become a product of your environment, right? I'm sure a lot of your leadership methods now you pulled from, a general you saw that had his shit wired tight, or another warrant officer, where anyone throughout, as you're progressing through, maybe when you're an E4, it was an E6 that was squared away, and you take little pieces to kind of build your toolbox. So, I want to talk about that first. Like, what are some of the biggest lessons learned from leadership in that many years? And I don't, maybe if you can pull out a couple examples of people that maybe stood out throughout your career where you're like, that guy was a major mentor, whether he knew it or not, or that guy, was the standard. And that's what I try to emulate.
Yeah, you actually just finished that sentence with what I think a leader is the standard. You got to lead from the front. You got to lead by example. Those are very cliche, but if you're not doing it, you're not respected. So when you're a younger guy and you're growing up, the guys that are out there leading by example in every capacity, being the best shooter, being fit, doing all these things, you look at that well-rounded person and you want to become that person and you want to grow into that leader. Well, the true test of leadership to me is to motivate people to do things they don't want to do. And that's something in the service, going out on some operations where it's gritty and grindy, and it's not a Hollywood movie where there's a take at the end of it. You got to motivate people to go do that. And good military leaders do that. I was very fortunate, right place, right time in my career, to see a lot of opportunities and to meet a lot of great leaders. And some of them, stand out today. I'll throw one out there, Stan McChrystal. General McChrystal to me is one of the best leaders I've ever been around. And it was kind of unique. I didn't meet him until I was in my 160th career. And he was in the Ranger Regiment as the commander, and then went away for a couple years. And we were, in Afghanistan. We invaded Iraq, and then he came back to us as the commanding general of JSOC. And that man came into the environment and didn't just impose his knowledge and will. He came in as a leader, but had that gray man for about a month. And then all of a sudden it came out, and it was like a floodgate, and he changed the fight. We went, not to get into detail, but we went from chasing people to crushing networks. And the effectiveness was, a single man came in with that idea. Now, he had a very powerful team with him to make it happen. But that was an example of leadership to me. And to this day, I will tell you that great leaders, whether it's on the battlefield, on the sideline of a sports team, or in business, they're few and far between, because you have to have every facet of it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest leadership challenges typically come up when times are not going great. Like if, so you use a sports analogy, like when your team's 12-0 and you're like making the playoffs, like the locker room dynamic's great, everyone's feeling good. It's like when you're 3-9 and, everyone starts bickering. I would imagine there's, for you probably experienced that on maybe that deployment got extended 4 months, and, the guys you got to serve the guys up a shit sandwich and let them know the news. So like, how does in, your experience, how did the best leaders and even yourself deal with when times weren't so good?
The first thing is, you've got to understand where the men are. The worst you'll ever see an environment in the military is when you lose a guy in the battlefield. It just crushes everybody, especially if you lose more than one on a single op. And you have to get their head right. And the best thing you can do is get them right back out the door. Get them right back out the door, get them right back on point, and get them, crushing the enemy. It's the same in sports. If the guys have a bad game, you need to get them in a good practice. They need to practice hard. They need to get right back after it and go do it. So I would say the biggest thing I've always learned is if you do something where it's a tough moment and you don't do it well, then you need to get the mindset to where let's get after this and get better and get right back in the game. And that's always worked for me. And it's actually working in business too. You guys know that you have the peaks and valleys. And when you have the valley, how do you get back on the peak? And the peak is motivating people. And I think the key, I don't care if it's fitness, leadership, whatever you want to talk about, having the mindset to win is the way to do it.
And you mentioning that you found that good leaders were far and few between. What are some of the traits? And Bear's asking, what are some of the traits of the great leaders? What are some of the traits that or patterns you recognize amongst those that incompetent might be a little bit severe, but that you found weren't able to lead in a way that you looked up to?
The biggest thing that jumps out to mind is selfishness. People that put themselves before the men. I mean, if you're a true, and I'm going to use the military look at this, and this can go to anything. The mission is always number one. You have to accomplish the mission. You sign up for big boy rules, you accomplish the mission. After that, it's the men. Nowhere in there is the me word. So usually the weakest leaders that I've ever seen always had an agenda for themselves personally. I think there's something in military leaders, you'll see this. You get guys that, regardless of the service, they get in that senior level and they get to a point where they've been very successful and very good leaders, and they see stars in the horizon, whether it's general or admiral, and they change their leadership style. And they change it to become that general or admiral. And that leadership change is immediately noted by the men, and they become a different person. And I've seen great leaders fail to this, and then they become terrible generals, terrible admirals, and they lose their following. So it's one of those where you should, it's selfless service. You should never put yourself before the mission or the men. And that goes in anything. It goes in business too. When I show up here at Born Primitive, my agenda is not for what can I get out of me. My agenda is how do I make the needle move?
Is that something, did you have that your whole career? Or is that something evolved as you became a little more mature in your career?
I think when you're a young guy, I went in the military when I was 17. And when you're a young guy, you're just trying to hang on, especially in the community I was in. You're trying to figure out what's right, where to go. I think once you're become a mid-grade NCO and you're in the position of had to lead and things like that, you start to find what works and what doesn't work. And if you're a good leader, you gravitate towards good leaders. And the good leaders to me in sports, in the military, are always what I call the hardest dudes out there. They're the guys that, you're not going to beat them on the mats in the fight room. You're not going to beat them shooting. You're not going to beat them ruck running or running. They just put out all the time. But then when you sit down with them and you actually use their mind, they're leading. They're actually just have a composure about them that instills confidence. And I once, when we were getting ready to do an op one time, it was very, very complex. And I was the overall flight lead. And to be an overall task force flight lead, you have a lot of people relying on you. And when I got done with this huge briefing, I got brought in the back room by both my commander and the commanding general. And they're both like, that was an awesome brief, but can we really do the mission? What they were saying is, man, you sold it, but are we really capable of doing this? And I kind of chuckled. I'm like, I wouldn't have briefed it if we couldn't do it. And we went out and we executed that mission. And we actually had multiple contingencies in the battlefield that made it harder than we planned, and we knocked it out of the park. What's the lesson there is instill confidence in the guy, stay on point, and execute. So,
yeah, as you kind of grew in your career, Max and I were actually talking about this the other day. Did you feel a shift in, I feel like in this even relates to business, is that there's always a balance of like what I would call like charisma and communication as a leader, and then technical expertise. And there's kind of a scale at all times, or like a line you're walking between just being the overly charismatic, kind of really good at communicating. And it sparked when you said about them asking, can we really do this? Because you can certainly influence change and be a leader, being very charismatic, but there will be blind spots then if you don't have the technical knowledge, you or your team, to actually know how to build out and make something happen, or to know when something's going wrong. So the question for me is, earlier in your career, did you feel a shift from those two where like maybe you were the technical expert at a younger age and then realized like, oh, I'm in a leadership role. I need to be able to broaden my horizons and know how to influence and communicate on a grander scale?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tony. So first of all, if you're not a technical expert, there's one word we use in the community that will eventually come out. You'll be exposed. People will figure out you don't know what you're doing, no matter how much charisma you have. So you've got to be, in my trade, you have to be a technical expert. Now, as you get more senior, there are guys that are absolutely going to know more about how a weapon system works, how to work on a computer, things like that. That's where you have to take the balance and understand the big picture. The heartache I have with a lot of these guys in the community out there that are writing books and stuff right now is they were so junior. They were never in the big room when the big plans were being made. And their fundamental knowledge is what they saw on the X. They don't even understand the mechanics that got them there and the big, big picture of how we planned it and executed it. So when you get into that senior leadership role, you might not be as technically savvy, but you are strategically savvy at that point. So.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've seen you do really well here that 100% probably came from your previous job is, kind of briefing a plan with confidence to convince, in this case, mainly me on the direction. And, that would be no different than you briefing the CG on the op you were already talking about, right? And I think you've absolutely carried that over and to kind of lay out the strategic plan first. And then, all right, here's the kind of the tactical execution level of how we're going to get there. And I think that's such a valuable skill for anyone really in any position at any company. You really want to influence an organization, go into the boss's office and be able to brief with confidence how to get to a desired end state and then break down how you're going to get there. And I think you've absolutely crushed that. And you're way ahead of plan with outdoor and tactical, as we know. And I can't wait to see what this next year brings. But one thing I want to talk about too is just one thing that was difficult for me when I transitioned out of the teams was you're just never, and this is not meant to be derogatory. I know I've said this many times, like, you're just never going to be able to replicate that standard in an environment ever again. It's just impossible. And it's not a hit on anyone. It is the reality, as I'm sure, but you can still try to create that as best you can. And I think that was a big challenge I had transitioning is you kind of maintain that human expectation on others. And it's just such a different dynamic. You have to kind of modify the lens you view it through a little bit. But one thing that's cool with you is I feel like you've done your best, with your team in the back to create that. We were just at Western Hunt and Bruno's running 6 a.m. workouts after working a 14-hour, 15-hour trade show day. And you know how long those are, Tony. You're on your feet all day. You're exhausted. Your feet are all swollen up. And these maniacs were getting up at 5:15 to go hit the gym. And I joined them for the one and we just got after it. like you are instilling that culture, but also kind of the standard, you know what I mean? Because the more you do that, obviously we didn't have everyone there, but like there'll be that, I was the one person that didn't show up. Right. So everyone starts showing up, and it again, it sets the standard. And that was one of the coolest things I took from the teams was as soon as you showed up, it became crystal clear what the standard was. And there was like an incredible amount of peer pressure or cultural pressure to conform or get the fuck out. You know what I mean? And as new guys, obviously, like it's extreme because you better not even freaking sneeze wrong. And you know what I mean? And you got to be humble, and they don't want any macho bullshit. And you learn that real quick. There was one example. I'll just use his acronym, not his real name. He was our command master chief. Went by JJ. And I was a new guy. I was there it was probably 17:30 on a Friday, which, by then pretty much it's a ghost town. Everyone's cleared out. And I was there doing some new guy bullshit that I had been tasked with the other new guys. And I finally went to leave. And JJ, this is our command master chief, who's an absolute legend, was sweeping in the hallway at 17:30 on a Friday. And I just went up to him. I was like, I tried to take the broom from him, and he was like, "No, I got this." And I didn't say anything beyond that. But as I was walking on the stairs, I was like, "Man, that's the fucking standard right there. Like that guy is here on a Friday night. Doesn't need to. He's an E9, very senior. He's about to be out." And but that was common, right? And to be able to be exposed to that, it's a little challenging when you shift to a civilian environment where that's not necessarily a thing, right? But I commend you for what you've done. So I'm curious, like, how did you approach that? Was that intentional, or is that just you being you and it was just subconscious? Or did you come in kind of say, all right, I got to build the right team. And I think you've done a great job with that in bringing in the right people. That's important. But I think regardless of who you bring in, you're going to, be able to conform them to that culture in your expectation. And I just didn't, I want you to just elaborate on that a little bit because I'm witnessing it and I love it.
Yeah. So you know how hard it was for me. And I actually had to do this in front of my team. It took me probably 6 months to actually tell myself in the mirror, hey, you're no longer on a national mission. You're no longer running a super high-end training profile for the national force. You're making fucking clothes. And I had to take a couple wraps off to do that. And once you are able to do that and focus on what makes it tick, I realized real quickly it's exactly what you're saying. It's building a team. And I decided that when I built the team, that I need to look at the human side of it. And as you're well aware, I've hired a few people for tactical that had no tactical background. But what I found in their interviews and looking at them was the human side of it was they're willing to go anywhere and follow my lead. And I'm able to train them. So I'm taking people that have fundamental knowledge of it, training them how I want them, and then growing them into leaders. And it's working. It's building a team. Now, I treat my team like they're my team in the military. Meet their families, take everybody and go out and do events away from work, confide in them, let them talk to me, learn their personal life. And in building this team, right now I have what I think between tactical and outdoors, a very strong structure of junior leaders that I've built that as we grow the two segments of the brand, they can grow into it. And I don't have to pay God's money to bring people from outside to do it because they're learning from day one on. I think the challenge in doing this is having confidence in both who you work for, which is you guys, and then your own abilities to do this because it's not something easy to do. As you see, a bad hire can go really sideways on you. So I spend the time in looking at the people and developing them. But the word is team. There's nothing I ask them to do that I don't do myself. And you're seeing it at SHOT Show and Western Hunt. The first man in, last man out is my mentality. Everything is a team effort. Make sure the people are taken care of and the mission will get taken care of. So it works.
Yeah, it's an interesting exercise and something I actually think through a lot better when you look to set a culture is what is the culture? Because to use your example of like a tier 1 operations unit, what you need to be able to do is very obvious. You need to be the best in the world at operating. For a work culture, though, where the difference is a little bit is if you want to set that culture of, hey, almost like a like a Jeff Bezos early startup phase, it has to be known that that's the culture. And here's why I wrestle with it is like that actually, there's something enticing about that to me. Like the way my brain works, like I love the idea of having a culture where people are so dedicated to the mission that it is blatantly obvious when you're not. But I think you also have to be clear on what the ramifications of that are. And we went through those phases as a company to say like, hey, and that's for you ultimately and us to decide is, if we want to be that culture, we could be that. Now the standard changes and you hold people to a much higher standard. You even have to pay people different. You have to view everything very differently. Or are we in the business of creating a culture where this is a 10-year, 20-year play for people where if you have 3 kids, if you have 4 kids, it's a sustainable culture to work in, because those are 2 very different models. It's not to say there can't be some crossover between individuals that are just savvy enough to like, hey, they still have 4 kids, but they could work at a high-paced, really high-performing culture. But it's an interesting, like, it's almost like if you trace back to first principles far enough, asking like, how do we get what we want as an organization here? You will start to ask that question is like, damn, should we create a more cutthroat isn't the right word, but just high pressure culture because it will produce results. But then I think if you're approaching it from a prudent aspect, you do realize like we can do that, but there's going to be downstream effects there as well. So it's a really, as an executive, it's a really interesting question to ask yourself because it's extremely important for how the culture ends up shaping out.
You know how you know in business when your culture's working? I make it very clear to my people that when they leave, they're off the clock. It can wait till tomorrow. Again, we're not going on a mission. We are selling and building clothes. So when I get those texts and emails at 9:00 at night because they're working on their own time and there's zero pressure to do it, it's because you have instilled in them this no-fail attitude. And it's a business attitude, but you've instilled them what your priorities are. And I think that's something you have to do as a leader. If you walk out in my office right now, you'll see a whiteboard, top to bottom, numbered 1 to 10, my priorities. There's no question where I stand on what's number 1 through what's number 10. And if you're working on number 4 and number 1 hasn't been done, you're failing me. So I think you have to create that culture where you don't have to hold them accountable to it when they're not looking. Hold them when you are looking. And if they're still doing that when you're not looking, you're winning.
Well, and there what you just described is like the magic of what I think a true leader is that you don't build strong relationships because you're delusional and thinking that like the business, it's all about relationship and the business doesn't matter. You do it because you realize in order to get the best out of people, that relationship has to be there. And that's exactly what you're describing. The difference between being a hard ass as a boss and making people do things just to achieve an outcome, that will work. And it's not as if that's bad, but if you want people to take their own initiative, there's a relationship aspect. And I think that's just innate in us as humans that like, if you don't feel that connection and that starts to get severed, there becomes this slight resentment. And then we know what that does to a culture. It's the exact opposite of what you said, where like people are lying about what they're doing, or people are taking advantage of a system because there's kind of a middle finger to saying like, you haven't even taken the time to get to know me and all you're doing is asking for things. Now, of course, they're getting a paycheck, so you could argue that from the business side, but we're more nuanced as humans than that. And if you view it as just like a purely business relationship, there's going to be downstream effects that I think are bad for the overall organization.
No, and there's one more principle that I think translates coming over from the military. The military is very big. You know, they say, what's the speed of rank in war? It's a 7.62 round, right? So my philosophy has always been to train people to execute one level above what their current position is. And I actually just let somebody go that was a skill bridge we were looking at hiring because I felt that person was not able to move up to the next level, that I would make a hire that would be all they would be. And I'm like, this is not my culture. So what I like to do is once they're on board and they have the fundamental knowledge is give them a task that's above their level and see how they execute it. And then, oh, by the way, don't crush their soul if they don't execute it to your standard. Mentor them. Show them what they didn't do right, teach them, and then give them a second swing at something completely different. And what you're doing is you're molding a leader, you're training them to operate above their next level. And the whole idea is, you know, Bruno's 60 years old. I have a freaking stroke because I'm working out with Bear one day. And then my number 2 comes in and just picks up where I was. And everybody just blinks, goes, yeah, we miss Bruno, but guess what? We're still a business. That's how the military survives. And there's no reason not to build a business that way.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've seen you do really well that I can clearly see was derived from your military experience was is you give commanders intent, right? And then you delegate, all right, Kurt, all right, you're trip lead for this, or Emma, you're running this. And you just give general intent and you let them figure out how to achieve it, right? Like if you're going to assault a target, the CG doesn't need to be saying, all right, we're going to set up a BP here and we're going to, it's just like, okay, assault the target. And obviously you guys come up with the plan. And I've seen you do that really well. And then you're obviously there to just put a sanity check on it and you loop me in occasionally when it's needed. But that seems to be working really well. And I think in a lot of business, and I'm guilty of this, I think I'm a lot better now than I was a couple of years ago, but particularly when you've personally built it, over the years, and then obviously as more people get in the mix, but when you're the OG and you were at once doing every little thing, it's hard to begin to delegate it. So, if you were the lead breacher, right, and the lead, all the, then there's a breaching problem. You were 10 years ago, you were the lead breacher. You want to get in there and say, let me solve this, but it's like, no, that's not your job anymore, right? And the same thing happens with business, to be able to step off the line and trust your people and also allow them to fail. And I think that's where, I thought you brought up a really good point, is like, if they do fail, show them where they went wrong and actually mentor them. I think in a lot of scenarios with companies, they never actually get that feedback loop. And then there's just, they don't have an opportunity to get better because they're just kind of pegged as like, all right, they're kind of below average. And it's like, well, did you develop them at all? So who's actually at fault? Is it them? Or did you make a bad hire and you're not, working to mentor them and get them to the next rank?
Yeah, something else that I think is, again, and I just take so much, 40 years of my life was with the military. One of the things I do with my team that I think works really good in a business structure, I'll be doing something that's very high level. And it could be, I'm briefing the two of you in on it for approval, for money, whatever it is. But this is, something I have going in my mind. The example I'll give you is multicam. The whole how we're going to do a self-run on this, right? I will take my team and put them in a room and explain to them what my process was on this, what my thought process was, and what the feedback I get from you, because they get growth out of that. So if you're tackling complex problems that involve your experience, why not sit down at some time and do some professional development on your junior leaders and walk them through that? Because they might have never been in the room to experience it. So as they move up, they can, well, one, see how you think, and number two, know what the path to success was. There's a lot of things in business that can be rinse and repeat, and there's a lot of things that need to be some new dynamic thinking. I can tell you that since I've been here with Tactical and Outdoor, nothing has been rinse and repeat. We started on ground we didn't even hold, and it's about relationships, it's about dynamic thinking, and it's about taking some swings as a business that so far we're doing great. We'll knock on some wood here, but we're going to keep after it. And I think that's in our DNA as a brand, is if it's working, don't come off the gas.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point of reading in junior people into not just, obviously they're going to be in charge of the tactical execution of the task, but going up another layer and explaining some of the strategic implications, right? And you've done a really good job immersing yourself in, like, for example, like the cash flow conversion on like an order. Like you understand that very well now, Tony, obviously you do too. So if we're going to spend $700,000 on multicam fabric and it's the payments due in 60 or 90 days and it's not even getting made yet, you understand the implications of that from a cash flow standpoint for the business, right? And why that's actually a pretty big risk, but you're going to motivate your team. And I would imagine eventually they'll get read in on, okay, guys, we got to really rally and start rocking this because we're on the clock. And I think that's critical, because then if you didn't know that, you would just want to order everything and always have, 10,000 in stock. And of course it doesn't work that way. So I think you've done a really good job of, when appropriate, it's not always appropriate, but reading more junior people into the overall strategic reasons, so they have the why behind it. You know what I mean? Because that was always a little frustrating for me as a junior guy. I was just a lieutenant, 03. You didn't always get read into the why, but you had to be the messenger to your guys. And if you didn't have a why, you had two options. You go back into the space and you serve up the shit sandwich and pretend like you're behind it from the boss, right? Which wouldn't be genuine, but sometimes that's what you have to do, right? Or you go in there and say, all right, fellas, I know this fucking sucks, but just talk to the skipper and the plans are changed. Here's what we got to do now. But if you have no why to deliver, it's difficult, right? Because then all the E5s start bitching and this and that. And those are those dilemmas. All right, do I stick to my guns and pretend like I'm with the boss? Or do I just be open and say, yeah, guys, I know this fucking sucks, but we got to do it.
That's an ethos. And this company's got a good one, I think. And I think I could walk into my team right now, whether it's outdoor tactical, and deliver bad news. I would want to paint the picture why, because that's how I am as a leader, not just it's bad news, why? But this is how we're going to bounce back from it. This is what we're going to do. This is the reason why. Paint the picture and then execute and drive on. There's an old saying, bad news does not get better with time. And I believe in that. So when we're taking our lumps, you take your lumps, you explain to them why, and you move past it. You move past it quickly. But the big thing to always do is for every shit sandwich you have to eat, there's usually 3 or 4 really good gourmet meals sitting out there. So focus on that. Put them on that on point and get after both and work on it. My lesson in leadership has always been that when the chips are down, that's when you need to be your best. That's when you need to stand up and motivate. You don't at that point in time want to cave to it, because then if you cave to it, then you have just created a toxic culture.
Absolutely. Should we pivot into tactical outdoor a little bit? Maybe specifically tactical. Obviously, I'm very bullish on that part of the brand. We have made in the USA, a Berry compliant product. We also have trade compliant. That opens up a huge opportunity for us. So if you had a crystal ball, walk us through what you think the next 2 years for tactical and outdoor look like.
It's very bright. Just to back up for a second, what people don't realize, especially if you're not familiar with the tactical side of the brand, everybody in the country right now, in some aspect, is looking at human performance. Guys are getting in ice baths. People are hitting saunas. People are looking at nutrition. People are getting smarter. Even if you're not executing it, even if you're just talking about it, it's out there. We're the only brand that has taken human performance and put it into a tactical apparel. Everybody else is still running the same stuff. And I think that's huge, because that's why you brought me here. That's why we brought some other people in from the community to develop that product. Well, now we spent 20 months having an American-made capability where it didn't exist before. So for those that don't know it, the fabrics that we use, the textiles that we use, did not exist in the States. And we worked with a company for almost 20 months to where now we're producing it. We have our first order being manufactured for the Air Force right now. We have a couple brewing. The multicam order I was just talking about, we're going to be running here. It's all US-made fabrics, and it's all the performance wear that we built. And it's going to be available from us. Is it going to be a little higher cost? Absolutely, because the cost to make it here in the States is a little bit higher. But what is on the verge of happening with us at Born Primitive Tactical is very exciting, because all the special mission units and all the soft units in SOCOM are already wearing it. Now they can go out and do bigger bulk purchases. Instead of what's going on now is the individuals are having to buy it, or they're doing small credit card swipes. Now we can do unit purchases and get everybody in this performance apparel. And at the end of the day, you and I can look at each other and saying, we are actually giving the warfighter something better than what they're wearing. And that's why we're doing this. I mean, that's why you brought me here. You're like, do you want to make a difference? I'm like, let's make a difference.
Yeah. I mean, I always guess, all right, what will be, we have a couple new thoroughbreds in the stable the last couple of years, right? We launched outdoor, we launched footwear, we launched tactical, and we joke, okay, which is going to be the lead racehorse in a couple of years? I think if I had to guess, I think tactical and footwear could be in a foot race, no pun intended, to the finish line, because the shoes are exploding. But with the government business side, just the potential there is incredible. And what I think in hindsight, I'm so glad we did, and this what really wasn't intentional. 8 years ago, we didn't think we were ever going to launch a tactical brand, but I think the ethos of our brand has served us really well as we entered that space, because we came incredible, right? And particularly with our background, it's not some guys in suits in New York trying to design tactical apparel. Obviously, this is the world we come from, but also from day one, the brand has supported the military and law enforcement community. So we didn't have to pivot our brand strategy, because that was just true to who we are, and we're seeing that. Obviously at SHOT Show, the booth was packed, and everyone kind of wanted to be a part of this new thing. And at Western Hunt, it was an absolute zoo. So I think we've done things the right way. And, with what we've been able to do with the veteran community, with the medical bills, and obviously we have huge plans that we won't tease yet to continue to be a force for good for the veteran and law enforcement community. I mean, it amazes me that some of the competitors aren't real proactive about that approach, right? And they're afraid to show guns and the, just unapologetic support of the flag and, everything it stands for. It. So I'm really excited because, what we're doing is absolutely disruptive in a space that I think got a little stale. And I hate to say it, I think some of the brands got a little complacent because they're getting a bunch of orders from Uncle Sam. And that can allow you, imagine how fat your business can get if you're getting these massive POs all the time. You don't have to be that dialed anymore. You know what I mean? Like, the direct to consumer space we come from is so cutthroat. We came from the fitness apparel industry, which is the worst category, most competitive. We had to cut our teeth in that space and somehow we pulled it off. But now we're entering a space with that scrappiness that, the tactical space that I think might be in for a rude awakening, or as Bruno would say, stand the fuck by. But hopefully they're not listening.
Yeah, hopefully they are listening. Hopefully they are. So a couple things on that. Number one, on the outdoor side, just know that what we're building in the government space is actually a mix of tactical and outdoor. Our outdoor layering systems and everything that we build there is actually what is going in the government side. So when you actually look at the 25 items that we're initially coming out with for trade compliant and Berry, 17 of them are coming from the outdoor side. And obviously we're not trying to build a tactical product to replace the outdoor products. It's the same, but we're adapting it. The example I'll give you is our puff coat. We're having a removable hood so the guys can jump with it. The guys can fly in helicopters. So we're adapting an existing product for the mission to make it happen. The other thing is we know we're killing it on footwear. Well, tactical's getting ready to sneak into the footwear side too.
Lift that foot up.
We got this Patriot One coming out in September. And for those of you, and I won't get into details, but for those of you that are tired of a European toe box, jamming your foot in there and want a mid-assault boot that actually fits a man, we got something coming.
Yeah, we'll just call it out. The Patriot One. It's coming late September, right?
Yes.
It's been in development for how many, 20 months, something like
20
that?
20 months.
We went through 12 prototypes. And I think, that story alone and just the approach we took to develop that boot is a testament. That's kind of become the standard, right? We did that with the Op Assault Pant. We did that with the redesign of the Frontier 2.0. The Savage One was the same way. We've learned that if you put the extra work in on the front end and get the product right, all the downstream positive effects of that, it's just, it's you can't even measure it. We were obsessive over the stem boot, and I'll just tease the quick story, and I'm sure we'll have a bunch of videos about this. But the last thing that Bruno had to test after it had been jumped, swam with fins over it, even CQC, all the stuff, working out. I know we wore it to the gym a bunch. It was tested in pretty much every environment, but the last thing we needed to validate was a fast rope strip on the interior of the boot, which for those that have never done that, when you're going down a rope with a lot of gear on, it gets super hot to the point you got to wear like welder's gloves or, and many guys have burned through the outsoles of their boots by the time they hit the ground. I know I did. I wore a pair of Nike boots and we were fast roping onto the back of a ship, and it wasn't even that high. It was maybe 30 feet. And by the time I hit the ground, it had burned completely through both of the outsoles and midsoles. So I'm running around with no center part of my boot. You know what I mean? And that's because it was the Nike Free boot. It's pretty foamy. It's very comfortable, but you shouldn't be fast roping in it. So that was just an idiot mistake by me. But that's that's something that has to stand up. So what did Bruno do? You rent a Blackhawk in Tennessee. Because we have to validate it for real. We were going to do some fast rope towers, like that probably would have been fine, but we wanted to do it for real, right? So we geared up. We rented a Blackhawk for 4 hours. Very expensive, but worth it. And we got a bunch of dudes out the side, and we beat the shit out of it. And then you guys went up to 75 feet with the 90-foot ropes and did one more, just to all right, obviously that's probably never going to happen in real life. Most likely, I would hope not. But if it can withstand a 75-foot fast rope with full kit, we're good to go. And I just think that's a testament to making sure that by the time it gets in the operator's hands, particularly if we're putting our logo on the damn thing, it has to be validated because, in our space, reputation is your currency, you know what I mean? And trust as well. So I've had a lot of fun being able to be a part of it. And I think it's absolutely going to crush, and that wider toe box is going to be a game changer. So good work. And we'll see if you can outsell the Savage One.
Well, think of what we went through with the Savage One. And I think it's going to be even maybe more applicable to the tactical spaces. the barrier to entry with shoes is so high that we saw with the Savage 1. That separated us as a brand. There's 1,000 brands that can make a good legging. There's 50 that make an actual really good shoe. So when we came out with a really good shoe, I mean, the traction we caught right away, and Bruno, you and I were just talking about this in the conference room before this, it's going to have like this, that's a sleeper right now. Not that anyone thinks it's going to do bad, but like I'll just call it out. Like Solomon's the one everyone talks about. If you come out with one with a wider toe box that has all the technical capabilities of the best one there, then there may only be 3 or 4. So it's an even tighter space than the athletic space. So I told him, I don't think initially it'll be an insane pop, but I see that, and I hope I'm wrong there. I see that being one that builds momentum in a way that we look back and go, holy shit, like look how that's climbing.
Well, yeah. And, obviously the product is one part of it, but what I would hope, and we'll see how this goes, is for the consumer, you have a choice on, using your dollars to back brands that align with your values. And there's nothing against, a Solomon, but we are not them, right? And I would hope for the door kickers out there and the people serving in, as a first responder or military, like, hey guys, you have a choice to back brands that are actually trying to make an impact for those communities and maybe align more with your ethos. Like, put your dollars where your ethos align. And we've definitely seen that more recently. So I think that's another unique advantage we have, because a lot of these brands we compete with make a good product, but their values do not align at all with the warfighter. And guys, I think a lot of guys aren't privy to that. I'm not going to call out specific brands, but I think it's becoming a little bit more known that, to me, if I were still in the job, I would want to put my dollars towards brands that actually give a shit about what they do for a living. And I think that'll give us a huge advantage, but you have to nail the product. Guys are going to wear shitty boots just because, it's a cool brand. If you get both, I think that's the perfect storm. And I think that's how we're really going to disrupt some things.
Yeah. I mean, go a step further, Bear. I mean, we're building a good product. We're competitively priced. We actually have operators, besides the 2 of us sitting here and Kurt, a third guy we actually send it out to the field, and we have, them put it through the grind. Everything we do before we put our name on it is first class. But then go a step further. You're a veteran-owned company that to me means something huge. Like I don't care what it is, unless you're building the best of something, a one-off, that wins with me every time. Tony and I were just talking about brand ethos and stuff like that. Sometimes you don't have to have it. If you're building the best of something and it's the only one out there, you're like, I'm buying that. But we're in a very competitive market out there. So when I look at it, it's like, well, we've got the right product. What's your decision point now?
Yeah.
So
how crazy do you think multicam is going to be?
Beyond your biggest imagination. I got to tell you guys the story of this. So
all right, book that. I'm keeping my receipts, Tony. You heard
I'm
it
cutting
here.
that exact clip. From
I'm gonna tell you this.
That's gonna be the lead in to when we launch it. That should be the first 8 seconds is you asking that and him saying that, and then being like, "It's here." Can be the next.
All right,
clip.
Kai, if you're listening, bookmark that.
Yeah, you go ahead and mark it. So Bear asked me. So for those not tracking, to get something out on the street, it can't be in theory. I've got to actually put it in the hands of the consumer and get guys wearing it. So we're self-funding a big run of multicam to get it out there to the right people. Because right now there's only a few sets in existence out there, and that's the way the business works. So Bear asked me, how many sets do you want? I said, how many do I want, or how many can we afford? And we went back and forth, but my number was about 3 times higher than what we're doing, which obviously I know is fiscally not smart, but that's my confidence level of what I can sell on this product. I'm telling you that there's no question in my mind that when this hits inventory, that in the first 2 weeks, you're going to say, oh shit, we need to put another PO in.
Well, I think because this has been keeping me up at night. I think we're going to backfill the order in a month. So we'll have a second load coming to backfill, because I would rather be overly aggressive. The challenge is, obviously is having to front the material cost up front is a huge kick in the shorts. And we're not used to having to do that. I know once that money wire goes out, your team is going to be game on. All right, now we gotta get this back. So I'm confident in it, but the fact that it's going to land in Q4 is just, especially with what we have going on brewing with Veterans Day, which I won't tease yet. I think it's going to be absolute pandemonium. So we got to be ready. I think we need to bet big. You got to play a hand. Obviously, this initial order wasn't small by any means, but I think we're going to backfill it. And I think this will be a pivotal moment, because the demand for that pattern is so high. And obviously the government business we could get off of that is massive. So I hope we're all high-fiving by Christmas time on the bet we placed on this one.
This is a leadership talk, right? I'm going to help you guys out. Hope is not a course of action.
There you go.
Okay, it never has been. I'm going to tell you it's going to happen. I'm going to tell you the 3 things that are going to change the dynamic of outdoor and tactical here within the next year. It's going to be this Patriot One boot. It's going to be multicam. And on the outdoor side, it's going to be mossy oak bottomland. Those 3 things, we're going to be sitting here this time next year, and you're going to be coming to me going, what do you got now, Bruno? What do you got now? Because we're going to be in a different place.
Yeah, that is the challenge. You know what I mean? As every year, it's like,
they always come.
Well, you look at 2024, D-Day and Veterans Day and the Betsy Ross and Gadsden, it's like, shit, like, how do we pull that out of our ass again? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Veterans Day 25, I think we will. And I think it's, you know, we've learned this the hard way. And Bruno, I think you've done a really good job of this, is like, we don't need to constantly be bringing out new shit, because like, if you have a flagship product that's done right, that's your lead racehorse. Don't immediately change it. Right. And we've done that with the Savage One. You know, you look at like what Reebok did and Nike, like it was the Nano One. Then it was like every year there was a new Nano or a new Metcon. And sometimes like some of those shoes were just spot on. They nailed it. So like, don't change the damn thing. So, you know, the shoe guys are pushing me for the Savage 2. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna get rolling on it, but every year we don't need to be launching a new Savage, right? Let's let it run. And you know, the Opasalt pant is, I mean, it's there, man. We don't need to modify it. So I think we've struck in that balance of being able to have new coming in that excites the consumer, and obviously multicam was critical for that. Like if you don't have multicam in our space, you're missing out on a ton of business. But then knowing, okay, this is enough, we can run on this. And not overdoing it, and it's a balance. Like you try to keep it between the lane lines, but I think we're getting better at it on BP Main as well. Of just kind of have big moments on the calendar and mobilize the entire force behind it, and then just be able to sit back and let that run and not have to have something else coming out 9 days later.
From my experience, a lot of times, and a lot of this is BP, but even in life in general, there are more negative ramifications to thinking you need to do more rather than just being patient and letting those moments present themselves. Now, that doesn't mean either you can just sit on your laurels and be like, oh, what's the next big idea? But we've learned that mistake the hard way of it's chasing the shiny object. You have success with one thing, and then instead of letting that one thing take its course and then be very kind of aware of where that next big thing lies, you try to recreate that big thing too quickly. And what you end up doing is you create like 8 moments. None of them achieve what the initial one did. And you end up just burning everyone out trying to achieve it. So there's a balance there of like, okay, there's 3 big ideas that are being executed. And then honestly, the fear of, oh, what could we possibly do after that? That almost just needs to get thrown out the window, because it's funny how in life, I feel like those opportunities present themselves. And that's as a leader, you get really good at saying, there it is. There's that thing, like there's the next one, and you attach to it. But very rarely do I feel like you have to chase that, if it makes sense.
So you guys know I suffer from the disease that I can't turn my brain off. And I never stop.
I have the same disease.
Yeah. So when I'm texting Bear at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night with, what do you think about this? And he immediately replies, I know he has the same disease. But the other thing is complacency. Like in developing the Opasalt pant and a couple things, I have heard from the community, a couple things are like, man, you guys nailed it on this. What about this? So, you know, the military has this thing called the Skunk Works, where they develop their top secret projects and all that kind of stuff with different companies. We have the same thing going on. I mean, I am working so hard. We've finally got this US made stretch fabric that didn't exist. Well, now we're working on a fire retardant stretch fabric, and we're 9-10 months into this right now. And we actually have got something now that's a 2-way stretch that didn't exist, and we're going to keep pushing. So for 2026, you know, I'm going to sustain what we're building, maybe add colors here and there as we decide that the need is there. But we're going after a fire retardant capability that has stretch, so it's still got that athletic DNA and not coming away from who we are. And then we're going to look into creating a maritime uniform that's going to be a joint project with another brand that we're very comfortable with. So we're never going to rest, and we're never going to stop. But what I'm not going to do is take a really baller product like the Opasalt pant and try and make it the jack of all trade pants. We will evolve for the next mission set and create something.
Shifting gears a little bit, Bruno, I want to, Now that you've been in the seat for a while here, how long have you been with us now? Has it been
A little over 2 years.
Okay.
Matter of fact,
In 2 years.
So here's the irony. Do you guys, my first day with Born Primitive was Western Hunt last year.
That's right.
Me and Kurt jumped on an airplane.
Or 2 years ago.
2 years
Bruno
ago.
was scaring people into buying t-shirts.
Yeah.
Bruno was running checkout and he had a stack of t-shirts. And that's when I knew you were a salesman, because they'd go to pay and you'd be like, t-shirts are only $20. You sure you don't want one? The guy'd be like, I'm good. He's like, come on, man, it's $20. They're only 32. And like, his close rate was like 80%. Like, this guy's a fucking savage. He doesn't even like work here yet. Or it was like your first weekend.
I didn't even know anything about the product, but they were buying.
I think they were just afraid of you. They're like, okay, I'll take one.
Whatever you say.
Dad, don't hurt me.
Do you remember the one guy that I talked into buying a Tundra and all 5 of them left fully out?
Yeah, that was Kurt's, because I think Kurt was still Skillbridge then, right?
He was.
Yeah, he was.
And that was our first outdoor booth. We had a little 10.
And it almost didn't show up. Remember, we couldn't find
the
it.
little 10 by 20,
the
right?
shit show.
And it's funny how quickly things got. I mean, obviously,
we almost had a little deja vu at this.
I know you were saying
it. So yeah, I've been here 2 years and about a week.
So what has been your biggest? What's been your biggest surprise, or what's something that you didn't expect coming in that panned out differently?
So first of all, I don't know if you guys remember my first interview with you guys. I really didn't even know I was being interviewed. I thought Max was just introducing me to a couple of cool guys that gave me some really badass workout clothing. And I realized these fucking guys are interviewing me for a job. I think my choice to step away from 40 plus years of a very elite service and to go in the private sector was heavy on me. I think the culture at Born Primitive is the only reason I'm able to do it. If I had gone to some of my other offers, going to a Boeing or this, that, or the other, and I'm in a suit, and I'd be an HR time bomb. Not saying we don't do business right here, but the culture here is let's get after it. Let's use our strengths and let's work. And let's not worry about some of the smaller things in life that you might worry about at a business. And the most pleasant thing I can say right now is 2 years later, I still really enjoy coming to work. I have a lot left to do. I was wondering, am I going to be happy? Honestly, guys, making clothes. Now I'm excited about what's on the horizon, the releases. You don't know, you guys are I know you're a little nervous, but you're like, multicam, this is a big, I'm like, I'm going to destroy multicam. I'm not even thinking about multicam because I've got multicam. What's next? So I like being challenged. If I'm not challenged, I'm not going to enjoy coming to work. And the fact that we are on a vertical here with this brand and the leadership that's here, I just enjoy it. I enjoy the culture.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think it feeds that competitive itch that we all have. Of course, it's different than the world we came from, but it's still similar that you're constantly having to solve problems and come up with strategy and execute on it. And then you see how it pans out and you should fire or adjust based on how it went. And it's just a constant loop of that. And I think that's very satisfying, although obviously it comes with some stress. And also just the element of like, what could this become? You know what I mean? What is this going to be in a year? And I always say this, it's like in a year from now, we will be unrecognizable to what we were a year ago. And you've been here long enough. I think I've pretty much been right every fucking time. Right. And I think these next 2 years, it'll be like we go light speed, right? 2 years from now, when we're in the new office and government business is ripping and we got 6 different styles of shoes and all these other things. I mean, I think we truly will be unrecognizable. And that's what excites me in putting the team in place. And one thing I just want to call out, and this is mainly for the listeners, like particularly if you're a junior, mid-level, any place in the chain of the command at an organization, like if you want to get ahead, regardless of what skill set you bring in initially or whatever your background is, you don't need a college degree. None of that fancy bullshit. I have a Yale degree. That doesn't fucking matter. You come in with the right attitude and you over deliver on your responsibilities in whatever position that is and go above and beyond, you will be successful in every organization you go to. And if you have the ability to take commander's intent and execute on it, and then follow up with a good feedback loop to let your senior manager know, hey, I took care of that and it's good to go. Or let's say a decision point comes up and you're able to go to them and you've thought through 95% of the solution already and you just need a quick decisional. That approach will carry you so far, because what a lot of people will come in is they'll go to the boss with a problem, and then the boss is having to make 1 million decisions in a day anyway, already has decision fatigue, and they're offering no solution with the problem. And I think the real value in guys like you and we have so many rock stars here is that I know you guys can take something and run with it. And other than maybe a few small course corrections, like you guys, I know it's in good hands and there's a good feedback loop of like, hey, here's where this landed, but it's a quick drive by and it's like low stress. And so I want to offer that to anyone in an organization. Cause I always put myself like, all right, if I were to go back to a company and be a junior, like an entry level employee, like what would my approach be? You know what I mean? I'd be taking the trash out. I'd be getting there an hour early. I'd be leaving an hour late. I'd be over delivering on my tasks. I'd be looking for extra work on collaterals of, if can you help run that trip or this, because we have people there that take that approach and it makes you stand out. And if you take that approach in any organization, you're going to excel. It doesn't matter where. And I just think there's so much fucking opportunity for people that a lot of them, I think, are just afraid to seize it and be above average. And there's nothing wrong with doing the bare minimum 9 to 5. But yes, you are texting me at 10 o'clock at night because I don't give a shit. And we're on that same pace, right? There's people that go above and beyond. And that's truly, I think, how you climb the ladder in any organization. And I just encourage people to not be timid wherever they're working, over deliver, be confident in what you bring to the table, seek professional development. If you're in e-commerce, if you come in and you're a military guy, and now you're a direct to consumer brand, learn about e-commerce, learn about conversion rates and LTV and ROAS and CAC and all these, you know what I mean? Learn the acronyms. I mean, look at what you did. You built a glossary of acronyms in the D2C space. Of course, you come from the military, so there's acronym city, and you come into the first meeting and we're using all kinds of acronyms. You didn't know what the hell we were talking about. So you built a glossary that then you shared with your people that you hire so they could learn the language. And you know what I mean? That's a proactive approach to adjusting to the new environment and excelling in it. So I just want to call that out because I think you two are really good examples of that. As a CEO, the value of that is just massive, right? Particularly in the early days when you don't have that. And when you start getting people in the right positions that can run with stuff and carry 90% of the weight, it allows me to really focus on big picture shit. Because if I'm on the firing line all the time, we don't know where we're going. You know what I mean? And that's my job. And if I don't do that, I fail you guys. So I just want to thank you guys for that. And I don't know if there's any, if that resonates with you guys at all, but it's
big time. Just two things I want to pass to the military guys, regardless, especially for you senior guys, senior NCOs, senior warrants, senior officers. When you come into a new culture, the two things I will say that are most beneficial is, number one, followership is leadership. When you get in there, learn from the people that are running the business. They got put in that position for a reason. Don't immediately try and be smarter or better than them. Actually learn from them. Tony's sitting here to my right, and to be honest with you, my first 3 months, everything the guy said, I wrote down in a notebook because I was trying to understand the business. So followership is leadership. The next thing is check your ego at the door. That's a very common thing. It's in sports, but in business, it's huge. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past, who you've led, where you've been. You're now in somebody else's environment. Kind of adapt to that environment and learn from it. And as you grow in positional power, you can bring a little bit more of that ego out, but don't let it show early. And then this is one for me personally. I always tell people to be the gray man. I'll never be the fucking gray man. I am going to show up day one, let people know who I am, and be a follower and a leader at the same time. I think if you stay in that gray man mode for too long, you're going to be, why'd we hire this guy? So I would just take that with you and use it where you see fit, because you're being brought in based on your background. So adapt to the environment you're in and execute. The last thing I'll say on the whole thing is if your senior leaders are putting you in a room and are redirecting you, take a look in the mirror. You're being redirected for a reason. You're failing. So
absolutely. Love it. Any predictions we want to throw out since we're on air and you can't walk it back?
I mean, I've been very clear on my predictions this year.
What do you got?
Do we want to put an exact number to it?
No, but just like,
I think
let's spice it up a little bit. What do you think, Tom? Call your shot.
I think here, I'll attach a number, but it won't disclose any confidential business information. I think we can achieve, I'm going to put a range on it. I think we can achieve 50 to 70% growth in the next 2 years as a company. So almost, I wanted to be even a little more bullish on that, but I've got to put on my not be too delusional on that state. I think 50 to 70% is a reasonable prediction, and that in the next 2 years we'll have that. We'll see that growth as a company. And I think a disproportion of that is going to be actually 2020. I think 2026 is a magic year for us. And I told him in the conference room earlier, there are some things that are in the works. And you actually mentioned it. We've mentioned several of them throughout this that are setting us up for 2026 to truly be a unique year for us as a company. So everything's in place this year to still achieve, say, 20 to 30% growth. But then I could see that following year, 2026, being a crooked number.
I agree with him. I think that I'll weigh in specifically on the government business. It's not a fast process. We're working on 2026 money, not 2025. 2025 is the awareness campaign. 2026 is when we start growing it. And then, to be honest with you, in the government space, talk to anybody that's been in it for a while, it'll continue to get more fruitful as we go on. But we're early in the game right now.
Bruno, do you want to ask Bear the percent off I was on this year's revenue prediction? Ask him.
Go ahead, share it.
Let's actually figure it out.
I have a feeling you're humble bragging right now.
I'm
Were you pretty close?
I'm
He's
humble bragging.
pretty freaking scared.
Let's see.
That's what he does.
Breaking out a calculator.
Okay.
Let's see what do you got. What do you got?
These numbers are big, so I gotta 1 sec.
For those that are listening, Tony's hacking away in his calculator. And if you don't get what we're trying to figure out here, to project numbers, what's the percentage?
I was 0.71% off this year on the.
That's
you
insane.
were in a 1%
That's
air box.
insane.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's the standard. You need to be within 0.5 this year.
This year I feel good. It's that, and it's in a good way. I think 2 years we're going to have. There are some things, and a little bit's just intuition and gut feelings, and a little bit is me knowing the numbers pretty thoroughly. Is that there could be a really crooked number in 2026.
I feel a little bit of pressure in 2025. We agreed on some numbers for outdoor tactical that I got to keep working.
We're all right.
It's got to scare you a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, those are, I like those predictions. I think to close it out, my first thought, I'm more thinking like this recently, particularly with after the last Veterans Day, but we've talked about this before, is if we were to get in a room and we were to brainstorm, a business plan for the next year, and we had our top 15 employees, and I just were to sit there and not say a damn word. Most people, maybe all, would be thinking clothing specific ideas, right? And what I've said to you is, how cool would it be if you went into a room and said, all right, for the next 2 hours, and we're on some hopefully remote offsite on a mountainside, drinking some whiskey and some coffee, whatever. We say, all right, for the next 2 hours, pretend we're not a clothing brand. We're just an organization. What are we doing, right? Imagine how many more creative ideas would come to the table if you wanted to make an impact for the veteran and the law enforcement community. I mean, that would just be one thing, right? And you just go crazy, right? And open up the aperture and go for that. So for me, obviously the apparel is what keeps the lights on. It's what allows us to pay ourselves and all these other things. But to me, the most exciting thing is all of those things you guys talk about enable us to have an even bigger impact and to shake things up even more. And obviously the veteran medical bills is one component of that. I'm curious to see how it evolves. I mean, obviously you and I are talking about maybe being a huge proponent for plant medicine in the veteran space for PTSD and substance abuse and all these things. Like, that's evolving. Obviously things going on in Texas right now, and with RFK and this. I mean, those are things it's like, why is this clothing company now going all in on making sure veterans get treatment for PTSD through Ibogaine? You know what I mean? Like, that has nothing to do with apparel. Hey, why are they trying to, pay off all these medical bills? We looked up that, and I'll have to fact check this, but I was told the outstanding VA medical bills right now is about $380 million, right? We were able to do 11 last year, but with what's in the works right now, which we won't disclose, how cool would it be to make that a 5-year mission, right? Where, hey, as a fucking clothing company, we're going to eradicate all VA medical bills. We're going to go out of we're going to leverage our platform, all this multi-cam, we're selling all these shoes and all these things. We're going to build a following, and we're going to use that platform for goods for something like that. So for me, as I look out to the next 5 years, obviously all these things that we're doing are exciting, and I love being in the game and the competitive nature of it. And of course, we have really, legit competitors in the space that we're always going to be going up against. But to me, that's like an even bigger calling that I think we're going to have the unique opportunity to execute. And the great thing about that is it's while it's an unselfish act, it ends up actually being very good for allowing you to do it even more, because you bring more people into the brand that want to be a part of that, right? So it's a good business decision, but then it feeds itself. Now the impact gets even bigger and bigger and bigger. So everyone wins. You know what I mean? We do a good thing. People become more loyal to the brand. Our sales go up. We make more money. So then we can put it back towards things like that. And so I'm curious to see, outside of clothing, what impact we can make as an organization in various ways. And I think that's, I mean, the verdict's still out, but I think we're on the right path. And
it's the time to do it. America's back, man.
You
can feel it,
right?
You really can.
Hey, when the U.S. hockey team is fighting because they booed the national anthem, that's when you can just feel it. I'm telling you.
And then you open up, and you see Kash Patel's the FBI director, and this is you're like, we are back.
I know. That's tangible.
Hockey, I think hockey is like the last pure place on this earth, right? Because here's the thing, I'm a football guy. After the play, one guy puts one shot with his hand on a face mask, and 10 flags go in there. It's like, all right, they both have helmets on. It's a passionate sport. The guy probably cheap shotted him, so he's coming up and he's swinging it. Let him do it. He's got a helmet on. Where you see after the puck is frozen hockey and it's around the goalie, everyone, they're punching, and a guy will wait, and then he'll sneak one over the ref. No penalties, right? It's like, let the boys be boys a little bit. And then if, hey, two guys want to drop mitts and go at it, okay. You both go in the box, good, clean fun. And you like, it's so freaking pure. And the fact that this Four Nations thing was supposed to be an all-star break, and these guys are playing like it's the Stanley Cup final game 7. A lot of these guys are limping back to their teams. They can't even play. Some of these guys have games on Saturday. This finals last night was Thursday, right?
Yeah. Who won? I only watched
Canada in overtime. But great game. Guys are sliding in front of the puck, on slap shots. I mean, that's shit you see in the playoffs, right? You're sliding in front of a 100-mile-an-hour slap shot for an exhibition game because you're representing your country. I mean, I think that shit was fucking awesome.
Yeah,
and,
awesome.
Meanwhile, the NBA is doing their skills competition in the game where it's so different. But I think hockey is the last pure place on earth, and I wish football had more of that, because I know they have to protect the quarterback. You know what I mean? Like it is a very violent sport. It's more violent than hockey, but at the same time, if two guys stand up after a play and they lock heads and they throw a couple punches, like, let them do it, because it's mutual. Like, yeah. So I digress big time as we close this out, but we are fucking back. America's back. Bruno, you got the final word, man.
Yeah, give us final word. We didn't talk about it. He teased
the
it.
Hotwash.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to hear more from this big gorilla beside me, he's gonna have his own podcast. So give us the 2-minute on that, Bruno.
Yeah. So we are doing the Hotwash podcast. The Hotwash is a term used after action for combat operations, very high-end training exercises where you debrief. So what we're doing is we're taking the platform, which is Born Primitive Tactical, and we're going to bring in people. We've already taped 10 episodes, had some rock stars, but I'm bringing people in from industry, operators, athletes, coaches, and basically getting what makes them tick, how it applies to the environment. And we're staying away from the things I really don't want to touch. Really not getting into war porn, not getting into exposés of units on targets. Let other people do that. But I really want to get into good things that are leadership, teamwork, team building, mindset. I'll give you an example. I started one off with Aaron Snyder, and we talked about how we got to BP and went all mindset. Derek Wolf, I did one with him. It was amazing. Because when he was describing what it's like to be in an NFL playoff run to go to the Super Bowl, it translated to me of what it's like to be on a combat deployment. It was the exact same mindset. You're all in, nothing else matters, nothing exists. So again, we take what's out there in the world and we translate it to what we do. And I think it's going to be a pretty hot podcast. It comes out March 3rd. We're going to release it. It'll be coming out on Mondays. And for someone that didn't want to do a podcast, I'm actually pretty excited into it right now.
Yeah, so yours will launch Mondays, ours launch Tuesdays, and then Aaron's The Born Primitive Outdoor podcast are his Thursdays.
Thursdays.
For the listeners, one thing, if you got some value out of this or any of the podcasts we've done to really help us out, go subscribe to Bruno's podcast, The Hotwash. Also, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe, do all those things for ours. That really helps us out. Obviously, we're never going to charge for this. But that's how we slowly build this thing, and it's been a lot of fun. And Bruno, stoked to see you. As the host, I know the guests you already have are super high level, and there's so much to be learned from that. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Closing down Snowmageddon here. Hopefully we can drive home. And Bruno, appreciate you coming in, man.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Bruno.
All right.